Good day, viewers. Welcome to the NUMCAL series for History, Grade 10 to 11, Lesson 1. Our topic for today is to assess the effects of the Peace Treaty of Versailles on Germany. After this lesson, you should be able to explain why the Germans hated the Treaty of Versailles. The Paris Peace Conference was an international meeting held by the Allied leaders in January 1919 at the Versailles just outside of Paris. The meeting aimed to establish the terms of peace after World War I. In the picture, you can see the big four Allied leaders from left to right: Lloyd George, Vittorio Orlando, George Clemenceau, and Woodrow Wilson. You can still remember that the Allied leaders decided the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Do you remember in which city they met to establish the terms? When the Allied leaders got together at Versailles in Paris, it was quickly evident that Germany was not going to get what they hoped for when they signed the armistice. The Allied leaders did not invite Germany to the negotiations. They agreed on the terms and then presented it to Germany. The Germans were threatened if they did not sign the treaty, then the war would continue. Germany was not left with any choice but to accept the treaty. On 28 June 1919, the Germans signed what they called the Diktat because they had no say in the treaty. That was already a sign that Germans hated the treaty. Why did the Germans hate the Treaty of Versailles? Let us quickly go over the main points. To help you remember these reasons, you may use the word Bart. Each letter represents one section of the terms of the Versailles Treaty that Germany disliked: blame or war guilt, armaments or military restrictions, reparations, German territorial losses, and losses of German colonies. Why did the Germans hate the Treaty of Versailles? Now that we have a general idea of why the Germans hated the treaty, we can now focus on the detail. The B in Bart stands for blame, or the war guilt clause. The Germans resented the fact that they had to accept the blame for the Treaty of Versailles. Article 231, or the war guilt clause, blamed Germany for starting the war. Why did the Germans hate this clause? Because they had to accept the guilt for starting the war. They also had to agree to pay the reparations that the Allies might incur. They felt that they were unfairly blamed as they were not the only ones responsible for the war. The Germans were not the first country to declare war in 1914. Another factor was the naval rivalry of Britain. Let us not dwell on the reasons for World War I, but get to the points of our discussion on why the Germans hated the Treaty of Versailles. Now for the letter A in Bart. Armaments or military restrictions. Why did the Germans hate the severe restrictions on military strength? What do you consider as armaments? Armaments may include the army, the navy, the air force, and weapons. Let us see what the treaty said about armaments. The army. The German army was reduced to 100,000 volunteers, no conscription. The navy. Germany was allowed only 36 ships, of which 6 could be battleships, the rest trading ships. The rest of the fleet was supposed to be given to the British. No submarines, no air force, no tanks. The German fleet was scuttled at Scapa Flow. The Germans felt defenseless, weakened, and humiliated. Reparations was another term that the Germans resented about the treaty. Reparations refer to all the cost of war that Germany had to pay to the Allies for the damages that they had incurred. Reparations were massive. According to the Allies, they had to pay £6,600 million, agreed upon in 1921. Why were the Germans unhappy with the reparation payments? The Germans felt the amount was too high for a country that was severely damaged by 4 years of war. Most of the war took place inside Germany. What they resented about reparations were because they lost their colonies. The minerals in the colonies could help rebuild the countries and help make payments easier. Finally, the T in BART refers to the territorial losses. Which of the territorial losses would anger the Germans the most? Germany lost land to France. Germany lost land to Poland. Germany lost land to Czechoslovakia. Germany lost land to Belgium and Denmark. Let us now look at some of the territorial terms. The Rhineland was demilitarized. No weapons and forts were allowed in the Rhineland. 50 kilometers on the right bank was controlled by the Allied troops. The Germans hated these terms because the tiny army already made them vulnerable, and with the demilitarization of the Rhineland, Germany was not protected against France. Territorial terms also meant Germany lost 10% of its industry, 15% of her agricultural land, but above all, the Germans were not asked where they would like to belong. There was no self-determination for the Germans. The Polish corridor had 1 million Germans. In the Sudetenland, in Czechoslovakia, lived another 3.5 million Germans. The final straw for Germany was that Germany lost her empire. The minerals in the colonies could rebuild their countries and help make the reparation payments easier. Another consideration regarding the treaty which the Germans hated. The Germans were humiliated that it was signed in the Hall of Mirrors, in the Palace of Versailles. This was because in 1871, after defeating France in a war, the Germans held a ceremony to celebrate the creation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors. The French were getting revenge for the previous humiliation. Germany was not allowed to join the League of Nations, and it felt excluded. The League became a club of winners. Explain why the Germans hated the Treaty of Versailles. The Germans hated 1. The dictated peace. 2. Being blamed for the war. 3. The reduction in the armaments. 4. Paying reparations. 5. Losing territory. Viewers, remember when you study this topic that these terms of the Treaty of Versailles were branded into the hearts and minds of the German people, and that is why it was so easy for Hitler to gain support when he promised to break the shackles of Versailles. Until next time, keep well.